Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we're joined together with the beloved retard crew, Grayson Hawk and Dave Farina. Now you are pretty much acquainted with who Dave Farina is. He did this big hit piece on Chris Langan which I debunked the fuck out of because it was full of nothing but lies and actually non-arguments. He lied about Chris Langan not having any evidence for him proclaiming that he has a high IQ, despite the fact that ABC News reported his IQ with a proctored test and a present professional psychologist to determine the IQ score. I've presented the sources a million trillion times, right? And I assume that we're pretty much going to be going over the same propositions, the same accusations all over again in this video. But why don't we give it a try and see if these two cannot scrape up together a new thought, a new argument or proposition. Maybe, just maybe, two brains are better than one, right? Or half and half makes one, I guess.
Our friend Chris. And when you actually look at this, like as in, does he have an IQ over 200? Right? That because that's
Not particularly exact, right? When somebody has an IQ that's tested about 145, it could be fucking 300 for all we know. We can't exactly measure it. This was in the 80s that it was tested on the mega test from the mega society, that particular test that we're talking about, but unanimously he's been tested by multiple different organizations under multiple different circumstances, and every single one of them, including ABC News providing a professional psychologist to give him a proctored test, a proctored IQ exam, proclaimed that he had the highest IQ he had ever seen in his professional career. So without a doubt, he has an IQ that is incredibly high. And I understand that it is very convenient to try to diminish his credentials, because that's all you guys can go after is just, jerk off to fucking credentials, because as academic dick suckers, that's all you have, right? But how about we actually address the arguments and stop, having a jerk off contest about who has the higher IQ or who has more credentials or who has less credentials? Because Chris Langan, as a matter of fact, does have reinforcement beyond the proposition that he does have a high IQ. It's just there's no other way about it. You can cry about it. You can say, this guy believes in God. No way he must have an IQ that is that high. He does. You can cry about it, but let's just get to the arguments, because the IQ really doesn't matter.
his main claim to fame, right? I even heard this when I was a kid growing up. The rumors trickled down to me as a kid. So
That's interesting. It never hit me. I learned about him when I found that Daily Wire video. I'd never heard of him.
so yes, after the Daily Wire video, and you actually not a standard IQ test that he took. It was a different version called like the mega test or something like that. And so apparently,
He also took one with a professional psychologist present, provided by ABC News, and his score was tested and reported live. I guess psychologists are just not lying for some reason. There's no point to this conversation. Let's get to the propositions. All right, let's get to the Kurt John Mungo video.
Well, the CTMU is a theory of everything. There are two kinds of theory of everything.
okay, so already I'm going to be pausing throughout, but he's breaking down these two kinds of theories of everything.
Yeah, there are two kinds. There's a theory of everything that encompasses absolutely everything, which is in a philosophical capacity, which is what a true theory of everything is, if we speak about it definitively, in terms of the definitional composition of that phrase, theory of everything. And then there is the UFT, the unified field theory, which is this notion of a unified theory of physics, which people proclaim to be a theory of everything, but it is actually not, because it is not philosophically encompassing. It doesn't encompass things like metaphysics. It doesn't encompass things like epistemology, ontology, or the justifications for these fields therein, right? So I'm sorry, but the webcam might have frozen for a little bit. I hope that
in
doesn't become
physics,
a
there's only
permanent
one
problem.
kind of theory of everything, and you alluded to this in your video, but he has this other notion of a philosophical theory of everything or a metaphysical theory of everything that is not a physical theory of everything.
A physical theory. Usually it's related to...
Which is completely valid, and you haven't provided a single argument against why that is not possible. Yeah, there's either a metaphysical theory of everything, which explains the physical theory of everything therein, right? There's different layers of explanations of realities, of reality. A theory is an explanation of reality by, and this is another thing that Dave lied about. He just made up his own definition of the term theory, and he said it must have empirical justification, or otherwise it is not a theory, and it must have a consensus and whatnot. It must be testable. It must be. He basically described the scientific method, and he said, "Well, that is a theory." It's like, no, there's not a single dictionary on planet fucking Earth that reinforces this notion, and I provided that in my video. So, another hit and a miss.
A unified field theory in some way, which means the forces of nature are supposed to be unified into one general force. But of course, that's only part of reality. And my theory is a theory of everything in the metaphysical sense.
So yeah, not a theory of everything in the actual physics sense.
In the actual physics sense, or do you mean in the actual sense of the definition of the term, or the phrase theory of everything? Because a theory of everything is in no capacity limited to physics. This is just something that you made up. It's a caricature. It's something that is convenient for people that are engaged in academia, or more particular fields of academia that are pertaining to science, right? But it doesn't actually conform to anything in reality in terms of what we're talking about when we say theory of everything, or the definitional composition of the terms therein, right? Theory of everything refers to something extracurricular to just a theory of physics, right?
Where that term originated, right?
Yeah. I mean, this is what grifters of this type do. They want to appear as though they are speaking very rigorously about scientific topics, but then when pressed, they will retreat.
No, Chris Langan has never spoken about science. He's literally never said that he is an authority on science. Nor has he said that he has a new revelation about the scientific nature of reality, the physical nature of reality, or the chemical composition of the physical nature of reality, or anything biological. It's philosophical, right? So he's definitionally not grifting, because in order to grift, you must pretend to hold a certain position, or pretend to hold a certain status or an identity as a public figure, while you actually are not that, right? Not the case at all. Chris Langan's entire theory, all of his papers are credited as philosophical in nature. He talks about this extensively, and he credits them extensively as philosophical in nature. So, and it is not grifting, because he's not pretending to be some, academic physics guru who's like a fucking, a physicist genius who's redefined he's united quantum mechanics and general relativity. It's like, no, but that is not the standard for a theory of everything, because that's not what theory of everything means. That's not what the phrase refers to.
To the ambiguity of philosophical terminology. So it's a philosophical theory of everything. Okay, then why are you constantly talking about quanta and forces and things that are physics?
Quanta and forces? Yeah, where does he speak about quanta and forces in a physical capacity? Right? Usually when Chris Langan is talking about quanta, he's giving a philosophical analysis as to what these things mean in a philosophical or metaphysical capacity. Where does quanta fit into a metaphysical theory of everything? Where does it fit into a notion of consciousness, to an understanding of consciousness that is metaphysical in nature? Where does it come into the redefinition of reality as not dualistic, or not idealistic, or not physicalist, but infocognitive? Right? Dual aspect monist. Where does it fit into this picture? And it is extensively talked about in the CTMU and different papers that he's had, in none of which he describes it as a permutation of a new physical understanding of these things. They're not physical understandings of these things, they're philosophical. It's a metaphysical understanding of reality. Now, Dave says this because he has no fucking clue what he's talking about. He hasn't read a single page of any single one of his papers, so it's understandable as to why he is speaking out of his ass. But then again, that is all that he is doing, speaking out of his ass.
It sounds like you want to have a physical theory of everything, but you
It sounds like you want to have a physical theory of everything, yet when you claim that you have merely a philosophical theory of everything, you just say that it is philosophical. I know what you want, Chris. I know what you want. It's just like mind reading things right now. It sounds like you want a physical theory of everything, and that's what you're actually calling it. Okay, it's like, even if Chris Langan wanted a physical theory of everything, does that mean that his theory of everything, he proclaims it to be scientific or physical or explains some new physical phenomena? No, it doesn't, right? Like if I create a theory, right, or if I publish a philosophical paper, and what I actually want is to publish something in physics, Dave would come out of the fucking bushes and be like, huh, you published a theory in the field of philosophy, but I know what you really want. You want to publish papers in physics. You want to redefine the physical phenomena or our understanding of physics. It's like, no, dumbass, that's not how it works. Even if you would, by some miracle of a chance, be able to read Chris Langan's mind, that wouldn't change his characterization of his own theories or the confines of the contents and the explanations that are contained within his theory, right? Again, they're philosophical, always have been, always will be. Notice that he's trying to shift it so hard so that it fits his hit piece, right? He's trying to make Chris Langan, he's trying to mold Chris Langan into somebody that is trying to be a grifter, or somebody that is trying to permute themselves as this identity of, or the status of some, physicist or something that is trying to explain reality in a physical capacity, but he just isn't, right? This is why he's trying so hard. It's like, but sounds like what you want is a physical theory of everything. It's like, yeah, dude, that's not how arguments work, dumbass.
Don't and do not understand quantum theory.
And you don't need to understand quantum theory in order for you to have a metaphysical theory of everything, right? You don't need to have a complete working understanding of quantum mechanics. You don't need to have a PhD in physics in order to have a philosophical theory of everything, right? Because it is philosophical. It is a different field, right? It is not science. It is not physics, all right? At what point is this finally going to click?
So everything he does is drenched in the ambiguity of a lot of this philosophical.
Drenched in ambiguity. So everything in philosophy is ambiguous, right? Everything in philosophy is ambiguous just by nature because it doesn't conform with your notion of what a theory of everything must be, or what Chris Langan is trying to do, or you think he's trying to do, because he just must be a grifter, right? So when he says philosophical theory of everything, what he's really trying to do is give you a physical theory of everything, despite the fact that literally in every single instantiation of Chris Langan talking about his CTMU theory, he's labeling it as a metaphysical theory of everything. So how come that is true? How come that is the case, right? Because Dave just knows. He just knows. That's just what you want, right? You just want it to be a physics theory so bad.
Okay, so there we got our first definition, right? We finally got all the disclaimers out, and the CTMU is the language that reality speaks to itself about itself. Does that mean anything to you, Dave?
Not to me.
Well, as long as they don't understand it, I mean, raise up our hands. Theory is debunked, right? It's like, do any of these people know what arguments are or how they work, right? It's a joke.
Okay, yeah, it doesn't mean anything to me either, but yes, okay, so the CTMU is a language. Let's see if he's gonna try to explain this again and again and again until we get it, and I don't think literally anyone will ever get this.
Yeah, despite all the people that understand the CTMU are going to be able to tell you exactly what that means. Yeah.
Which is an algebraic structure. This is a particular kind of language.
Okay, yeah, he's going a mile a minute. He's saying a language is a particular type of algebraic structure. That is just him redefining what words mean.
No. And by the way, language is not equivalent to words, right? What Chris Langan is saying, notice how fucking stupid he is, right? Chris Langan is giving you a definition of what a language is, and he's like, language is a particular type of an algebraic structure, and this Grayson guy is like, he's just trying to redefine what words mean. It's like, no, he's talking about language, right? He's talking about the essential composition that is necessary in order for you to characterize a language as such, right? So language people usually perceive of as a format of communication, right? And what Chris is basically saying is that any format of of communication is going to be reducible to an algebraic structure. It has symbols, it has operators, it has all these different moving components which could be characterized in any shape or in any language as a algebraic structure. It fits perfectly into the mold of what would be characterized as an algebraic structure. Therefore, a language is reducible or is an algebraic structure. So.
Why would we call that algebraic? I don't know. I mean, the deeper that we delve into philosophy and logic, I'm at risk of not speaking accurately on stuff. But
yeah, because you have no clue what any of these things mean. You have no understanding of. At least he admits it. At least he admits that he has no fucking clue what philosophy or logic or any of these things in philosophy and logic are. Right? At least he admits it. So I guess video is done. Dave admits to not knowing anything that he's fucking talking about insofar as you're talking about philosophy or logic. Great. What am I doing here? As long as he admits it, I mean, there's no point.
You know, the most charitable you can get is that, like, obviously logic can be expressed with math. Right, and that was the whole point of like Frege's revolution, was to take like Aristotelian logic and break it down to like a calculus, like a rigid mathematical calculus. So that's true, but that's the closest you can get to have to anything that even remotely pertains to the sentence he said. I don't see any real strong correlation there.
Yeah, so we're kind of getting around like a central theme of Chris's work, where he either makes up his own words with their own unique definitions.
Yeah, let me give you a revelation, Grayson. You might be able to take this to the grave, right? It may just rock your world, right? You may just recall that when you were a kid learning how to speak a language in elementary school, or even before that, right? You know, practicing your English, learning how to speak. Do you recall at any point where anybody told you that words were not made up? Or did you come intuitively to the notion that words are not made up all on your own? Is this like a genius, intuitive adventure of yours that you arrived at? All words are made up. All words are made up, bro. Yeah, words just refer to things. Right? So the point of creating a new word is to refer to something that somebody else hasn't, right? It's like, I have no words. This is just hilarious.
Or he just changes the definitions of.
Nobody's changing the definition of anything, and you're not going to be able to tell me a single time throughout the entire CTMU. Otherwise, you'd be able to cite it, right? If you want to debunk the CTMU, you would, because it's easy, Dave was asked to review the Kurt Jaimungal video, and he was like, it's a waste of time. I wouldn't even do that. But here he is doing it for some fucking content. And he's like, oh, well, Chris Langan has no idea what he's talking about. I've debunked the CTMU. It's like, okay, well, it's a slippery slope. You go from the Michael Knowles interview, and then, when people pressure you into it enough, and when you're down bad for content enough, then you do the Kurt Jaimungal interview. How about at just some point of trying to debunk the CTMU, maybe doing the video on the CTMU, right? At what point is that going to happen? Never?
Words that we all use, like language. And when Chris...
Yeah, because that's what... In philosophy, what you do is you get to a true or more essential understanding of what words mean, right? So when somebody says something is good, this candy is good, right? And Grayson would be like, oh... well, look at what these philosophers are doing. Look at this. Look at these sneaky tactics they're doing. They ask questions of. They make complete redefinitions of the word good, right? When we say good, when I say this candy is good, I just mean it feels very yummy. It just tastes yummy. And there go those evil philosophers redefining those words. It's like, you're stupid, all right?
He uses the word language. He means something that no one else means when they say.
Yeah, because when you're trying to describe reality in a capacity that nobody else has ever described it before, right? You probably mean something different by the words, or you look at the words in a different angle, or you're trying to shine a different light on them in a different context, in a different metaphysical theory, as all philosophers throughout history have. Are all philosophers just guilty of this? It's like, I guess, but it doesn't mean much, all right? It doesn't hold any weight or significance in the form of an accusation. It just doesn't mean much.
Language. Not any linguist, not any philosopher of language. Nobody else means language the same way that Chris means language.
Actually, all of them mean language differently. Like, if you look at philosophy of language, people define language differently all the time. And people in philosophy define different terms that are essential to a Weltanschauung or a worldview pertaining to their own particular worldviews differently all the time. This is what sets science apart from philosophy, is that philosophy, there's no real consensus. There's no real unanimous consensus.
He's just making up new definitions for things.
Making up new definitions. And even if it were to be the case that Chris Langer was making up completely new definitions, it wouldn't make it unjustified, because in order to make it unjustified, you have to demonstrate why it is the case that definitions cannot be made up, or why this one in particular is not a good instantiation or a good instance of a definition being made up, because you would have to point out how it is invalid, or how it is incoherent, or how it is not consistent, or not self-consistent, or how it is not descriptive. Right? These are criterions, right, by which you can judge whether a newly made up definition or a new characterization of a previously known term is valid or not, none of which you have fulfilled. So your argument or your accusation or your rebuttal means jack shit, because it doesn't actually fulfill this criterion, which determines the validity or the invalidity of a newly arrived at definition of a particular term. So
that reality actually uses to communicate